Kilo's outpost wasn't the worst place Ryan Mitchell had ever worked, but it definitely wasn't making the list of favorites either. Built into a massive asteroid at the edge of what passed for neutral space, the station served as a trading hub where dozens of species converged to buy, sell, and conduct the kind of business that benefited from minimal core world oversight. It was crowded, noisy, perpetually smelling like a combination of recycled air and whatever cooking methods the various species employed, and operated under the universal frontier principle that violence was expensive but suspicion was free. Ryan had been the station's human freight coordinator for 2 years, which meant his job consisted of managing cargo transfers, dealing with clients who ranged from professional to barely coherent, and trying very hard not to get involved in anything that wasn't explicitly his responsibility. Humans were a minority on Kilos, and smart minorities kept their heads down and their involvement in station politics to an absolute minimum. The market district was the heart of Kilos's commercial activity, a sprawling maze of permanent stalls, temporary vendors, and the kind of impromptu commerce that happened when someone had something to sell and someone else had currency to spend. Ryan navigated through crowds that included Elthari merchants, Venturi traders, human freelancers, and representatives of at least a dozen other species he could identify, and several he couldn't. He was taking a shortcut through the textile section, heading back to his office after a particularly frustrating negotiation with a supplier who tried to pass off substandard cargo containers as premium quality, when he heard the commotion. A small group had gathered in the narrow space between stalls, that particular kind of crowd that forms when something interesting or potentially dangerous is happening, and people can't decide if they want to watch or leave. Ryan's first instinct was to keep walking. Whatever was happening wasn't his business, and getting involved in station disputes was a reliable way to create problems. But then he heard a child's voice, high and frightened, and his conscience overrode his caution. Ryan pushed through the crowd and immediately assessed the situation. 3 Viridian youths, probably equivalent to human teenagers, though with Viridians it was sometimes hard to tell, had backed a small Karvath child into the corner between 2 stalls. The Karvath was maybe 7 or 8 by human developmental standards, dressed in simple clothing that suggested civilian rather than military family, and was clearly terrified. The Karvath were a proud warrior species known for their strength, strict honor codes, and general tendency to keep to their own isolated worlds. Seeing a Karvath child alone on a trade station was unusual enough to be remarkable. Seeing one being harassed by Viridian youths was the kind of situation that could escalate badly. "Hey," Ryan said, keeping his voice level and his posture non-threatening but firm. "Problem here." The Viridians turned, assessing him with the kind of casual hostility young people often directed at interference. The lead youth, a male with the typical Viridian height advantage and elaborate skin patterns, sneered. "Not your business, human. Keep walking." "Kid looks scared. That makes it my business." Ryan kept his attention divided between the youths and the Karvath child. "You all should probably move along before station security decides this looks like harassment." "We're just talking. Talking that requires 3 of you backing one child into a corner." Ryan pulled out his data pad and made a show of accessing station security frequencies. "Pretty sure there are regulations about that." "Want to test them?" It was a bluff. Ryan had no particular authority beyond his freight coordinator credentials, but the mention of security was enough to make the Viridians reconsider. They were probably just bored youths looking for entertainment rather than serious threats, and station security's response to harassment complaints was unpredictable enough that smart people avoided testing it. The lead youth spat something in Viridian that Ryan's translator marked as profanity, but the group dispersed into the market crowds. Ryan waited until they were definitely gone before turning his full attention to the Karvath child. "You okay?" he asked gently, crouching to be less intimidating in height. The child stared at him with large eyes that were distinctly Karvath, slightly more forward-facing than human eyes, with the characteristic dual-color irises. He didn't speak, but he was trembling slightly. "I'm Ryan. I work here on the station. You understand standard." A small nod. "Good. Are you hurt?" Head shake. "Okay, that's good." Ryan sat down fully, getting to eye level. "Can you tell me your name?" Silence stretched, then very quietly, "Terk." "Hi, Terk. Nice to meet you, though I wish it was under better circumstances." Ryan kept his tone gentle. "Where are your parents? Or whoever's supposed to be with you?" Terk's eyes welled up, and Ryan immediately regretted the question. Lost children were always distressing, but lost children from species with strong family structures like the Karvath were particularly panicked about being separated. "Okay, it's okay, we'll find them." Ryan stood slowly, offering his hand. "Want to come with me? We'll look together." Terk hesitated, clearly torn between fear of being alone and wariness of the strange human. Finally, he took Ryan's hand with a small grip that was stronger than expected. They walked through the market district, with Ryan asking vendors if they'd seen a Karvath adult looking for a child. The responses were mostly negative, though a few vendors gave Ryan and Terk curious looks. Humans and Karvath didn't typically interact casually, and seeing them together was unusual enough to draw attention. "Do you remember where you last saw your parent?" Ryan asked after they'd covered a significant section with no luck. "Mother," Terk said quietly, "where they sell fabrics. The textile section. That's not far from where I found you." Ryan adjusted their route. "What does your mother look like?" "Tall, strong." Terk paused. "She has the commander marks." Ryan's stomach dropped slightly. Commander marks meant military, probably high-ranking. He just spent the last hour walking around with the lost son of a Karvath military commander, which meant when they finally found his mother, the response was going to be intense and quite possibly directed at him, with suspicion about why a human had her child. They were passing through a section that sold technological components when Terk suddenly pulled on Ryan's hand. "Mother." Ryan looked up and saw a Karvath woman moving through the crowd with obvious purpose and barely controlled panic. She was tall even by Karvath standards, powerfully built, with the angular features characteristic of her species. She was wearing formal attire that confirmed Terk's description. The geometric patterns on her clothing marked her as military, and the specific configurations indicated command rank. "Terk." The woman's voice carried authority even in its obvious relief. She covered the distance between them in seconds and gathered Terk close, speaking rapidly in Karvath that Ryan's translator couldn't quite keep up with. Then her attention shifted to Ryan, and her expression transformed from relief to something more complex, gratitude mixed with assessment and what might be suspicion. "You are?" she asked in heavily accented but precise standard. "Ryan Mitchell, Station Freight Coordinator." He kept his posture non-threatening but professional. "I found Terk being harassed by some Viridian youths in the textile section. I helped get him away from them, and we've been looking for you." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Harassed how?" "They had him backed into a corner. Looked like it was escalating from teasing to something more physical. I intervened and they left." She studied him with uncomfortable intensity, clearly evaluating his story for truthfulness and potential threat. Terk said something in Karvath, urgent and explanatory. The woman's expression shifted slightly, some of the suspicion easing. "You protected my son from threat," she said formally. "I am in your debt." "No debt necessary, just helped a kid who needed it." Ryan gestured to the crowd around them. "The market can be overwhelming, easy to get separated." Nevertheless, she straightened to her full imposing height. "I am Commander Sierra of the Karvath Third Fleet. My son says you were brave and kind. These are qualities worthy of acknowledgement." Ryan was trying to formulate a polite way to say, "Glad I could help. I'll be going now," when Terk whispered something to his mother in Karvath. Sierra looked surprised, glanced at Ryan, then responded to Terk quietly in their own language. "My son wishes to thank you properly," Sierra said, her tone suggesting this was more significant than it sounded. "I would like to as well, but not here in the market chaos. Would you be willing to meet with us formally tomorrow?" At the 16th hour, Ryan's brain caught up to the fact that he was being given what sounded like a command, politely phrased as a request from a Karvath commander. Refusing seemed both rude and potentially dangerous. "I'd be honored," he managed. Sierra nodded once, precise and formal. "The Crimson Hall dining establishment in the diplomatic quarter. My family will cover all expenses." She placed her hand on Terk's shoulder. "Come, Terk. We must return to our quarters." As they left, Terk looked back once, gave Ryan a small wave, and then disappeared into the crowd with his mother. Ryan stood in the market district, watching them go, and slowly realized he had absolutely no idea what he just agreed to. Meeting formally with a Karvath commander to be thanked for helping her son was probably loaded with cultural protocols he didn't understand and complications he couldn't predict. "Well," he said aloud to no one in particular, "this is going to be interesting." Around him, the market continued its chaotic commerce, and Ryan headed back to his office already planning the research he'd need to do before tomorrow's meeting. Helping a lost child had seemed like a simple choice at the time. Somehow he suspected it was going to turn out to be considerably more complicated. Ryan spent his evening shift breaks and the late hours after work diving into every database entry about Karvath culture he could access. What he discovered was simultaneously fascinating and concerning. The Karvath had elaborate protocols around honor, debt, and social obligation. Their society was built on matriarchal structures where women held positions of military, political, and social authority. Males occupied important but generally subordinate roles: craftspeople, educators, support personnel. Warriors and commanders were exclusively female, which made Commander Sierra's position exactly what her title suggested: someone with significant power and authority. The concept of debt of protection was particularly relevant to Ryan's situation. When someone protected a Karvath child from danger, especially the child of someone with rank, the family was honor-bound to acknowledge the debt formally and publicly. Refusing to allow this acknowledgement was considered a serious insult that could have lasting social consequences. There was also repeated mention that Karvath viewed humans with suspicion. The cultural notes suggested that Karvath considered humans unpredictable, culturally aggressive, and lacking proper honor structures. Cross-species friendships between Karvath and humans were noted as extremely rare, with several database entries emphasizing that cooperation is professional only and does not extend to social bonding. Ryan leaned back in his quarters' limited seating and stared at his data pad. He'd accidentally gotten himself involved in a complex cultural situation with a species known for being suspicious of humans, and tomorrow he had to attend a formal meeting with a military commander to be thanked for helping her son. "No pressure," he muttered to himself. The 16th hour arrived faster than Ryan would have preferred. He dressed in his best professional attire, formal enough to show respect but not so elaborate as to suggest he was trying too hard. The Crimson Hall was in the diplomatic quarter, a section of Kilo's outpost that he rarely had reason to visit. The restaurants here catered to species with expense accounts and political connections, not freight coordinators trying to manage station logistics. The host at the entrance looked vaguely surprised to see a human, requesting the commander's private dining room, but led him through the establishment's elegant interior without comment. The private room was smaller than Ryan expected but beautifully appointed, with lighting and furniture that suggested Karvath preferences. Commander Sierra was waiting, with Terk seated beside her. She was wearing formal military attire that made her previous clothing look casual by comparison. Elaborate geometric patterns in deep reds and blacks that marked her rank and family lineage. Terk was in formal youth clothing, looking distinctly uncomfortable in his finery but brightening when he saw Ryan. Mr. Mitchell. Sierra stood, and the gesture carried the formality of military protocol. Thank you for attending. Commander Sierra, thank you for the invitation. Ryan took the seat indicated, feeling distinctly out of his depth in the formal setting. Please sit. We have much to discuss. Sierra waited until Ryan was seated before continuing. First, I must acknowledge formally and with witnesses. She gestured to two Carvath standing near the door that Ryan hadn't noticed before, that you acted with courage and honor in protecting my son from threat. You intervened when others might have passed by. You ensured his safety and returned him to me. This creates a debt that my family recognizes. Ryan had read enough to know he was supposed to respond formally. I'm honored by the acknowledgement, Commander. I acted as anyone should when a child needs help. No debt is necessary. Nevertheless, the debt exists. Sierra's expression softened slightly, less formal command and more genuine gratitude. You could have ignored the situation. Many would have. You chose protection over safety, intervention over avoidance. These are qualities my people value highly. Terk, who'd been sitting quietly but clearly wanting to participate, spoke up in careful standard. You scared the mean people away. You weren't scared of them. I was a little scared, Ryan admitted honestly. But you needed help, so that was more important than being scared. Terk processed this with visible thoughtfulness. Sierra watched the exchange with interest. My son has been speaking of you since yesterday, she said, telling me about the brave human who protected him. He has questions about humans and Earth that I cannot answer. He has. She paused, searching for words, requested that I allow him to know you better. Ryan wasn't sure what the appropriate response was to that. I'm happy to answer questions if that's acceptable to you. It is unusual. Carvath children do not typically interact casually with other species, especially humans. But Terk is curious by nature, and you have earned considerable trust through your actions. Sierra signaled, and servers began bringing food, a mixture of Carvath dishes and some that looked like attempts at human-compatible cuisine. Let us eat and speak more informally. The formal acknowledgement is complete. As the meal progressed, the atmosphere relaxed considerably. Terk asked questions about Earth, what it looked like, what human children did, whether Ryan had fought in battles. Ryan answered honestly, explaining that Earth was diverse and complicated, that most human children never saw battle, and that his own life had been fairly ordinary until he decided to work in frontier space. Why did you come here? Terk asked around a mouthful of food that earned a disapproving look from his mother. Wanted a change. Earth got complicated, and out here I could do useful work without the politics and connections that matter so much in core worlds. You ran away, Sierra said bluntly. Ryan considered denying it, then decided honesty was probably more appropriate. Yeah, basically. Not from anything criminal or shameful, just from expectations and a life that wasn't fitting anymore. Figured frontier stations needed competent freight coordinators, and didn't care much about where I came from or who I knew. Sierra's expression suggested this answer surprised her. You admit to self-interest. Most humans would claim more noble motivations. Most humans would be lying. I helped Terk because it was the right thing to do, but I came to Kilos because it served my own needs. Both can be true. Indeed they can. Sierra looked thoughtful. Carvath value honesty about motivation. We find species who claim purely altruistic reasoning to be generally untrustworthy. Self-interest is natural and not shameful. Acting honorably despite self-interest is what demonstrates character. The meal continued with increasingly comfortable conversation. Ryan learned that Sierra was stationed on Kilo's outpost as part of a diplomatic mission. The Carvath Third Fleet maintained a presence here to facilitate trade negotiations and maintain security cooperation with other species. Her position essentially made her Carvath nobility, which explained the elaborate formal protocols around their meeting. Sierra learned that Ryan's freight coordinator role was more complex than it sounded, that he'd developed expertise in cross-species logistics and had a reputation for solving problems that more formal bureaucracies struggled with. Terk mostly listened, occasionally interjecting with questions that were blunt in the way children's questions often are. He asked if Ryan had a family, no, whether he liked living on stations mostly, and if he would teach Terk about human fighting techniques, which earned an immediate inappropriate from Sierra and an amused response from Ryan. Familiar sections of Kilo's outpost. He reflected that helping a lost child had somehow evolved into the beginning of what might be a genuine friendship with a Karvath commander and her son. It was definitely not the kind of complication he'd expected when he intervened yesterday, but as complications went, it was starting to seem like it might be a positive one. Time would tell. It usually did. The visit started cautiously, with Ryan stopping by Sierra and Terk's quarters in the diplomatic section once or twice a week after work shifts. He brought small gifts, carefully researched to ensure they were culturally appropriate, like data crystals containing Earth documentaries, approved by Sierra first, or simple puzzles that Terk could solve. Terk was endlessly curious about humans and Earth. He wanted to know everything. Why humans had so many different languages when most species had one or two, whether it was true that human children attended massive schools with hundreds of students. The concept both fascinated and horrified him. Karvath education was done in small, family-based groups, and why humans didn't have honor marks that visibly displayed their achievements. Because we track achievements differently, Ryan explained during one visit, while Terk examined a holographic display of Earth's continents. We use records and credentials instead of visible marks. But how do you know who is important? We don't always. Sometimes you have to talk to people to learn about them instead of reading it from their appearance. Terk considered this with the serious concentration children apply to concepts that challenge their worldview. That seems confusing. It can be. But it also means people can surprise you. Someone who looks ordinary might be remarkable, and someone who looks important might not be. Sierra, who'd been working on something at her desk while half monitoring their conversation, spoke up. That is not how Karvath society functions. Status and achievement should be immediately visible. Different approaches, Ryan said diplomatically. Both have advantages. Over the weeks, Sierra's careful supervision of the visits gradually relaxed as she observed that Ryan's interest in Terk was genuine, that he answered questions with patience and honesty, and that he respected Karvath protocols even when they were clearly unfamiliar. She began participating more actively in conversations instead of just monitoring them, and Ryan found himself learning as much about Karvath culture from her as Terk was learning about humans from him. He learned that Sierra was a widow. Her partner had died in military action 3 years ago. Raising Terk alone while maintaining her command position was challenging, especially in the context of a diplomatic mission where she was constantly under scrutiny from her own people to demonstrate that Karvath's strength and values weren't compromised by living among other species. There is considerable pressure, she admitted during one conversation after Terk had fallen asleep and they were talking quietly in her quarters' common area. To show perfect protocol, perfect command presence, perfect adherence to all expectations. Any deviation is noted and reported back to the Fleet Council. That sounds exhausting. It is. She looked toward where Terk slept in the adjacent room, but necessary. I want him to grow up seeing that Karvath can maintain our values even surrounded by other species, that we don't have to isolate ourselves to preserve what we are. Is that a common debate, whether to isolate or integrate? Constant debate. Some Karvath believe we should limit contact with other species to pure necessity, trade and security cooperation, but no social bonds. Others believe we must adapt to a universe where isolation is no longer practical. She smiled slightly. I am obviously in the latter camp, or I would not be allowing my son to develop friendship with a human. The friendship was affecting both their lives in ways neither had fully anticipated. Other Karvath stationed on Kilo's outpost noticed that Commander Sierra was allowing a human into her private quarters, permitting him around her son. There was gossip. Ryan could see it in the way some Carveth gave them looks when he arrived at the diplomatic quarter, in the subtle changes in how Sierra's subordinates addressed her when he was present. Similarly, Ryan's human colleagues found his friendship with a Carveth commander fascinating and slightly suspicious. More than one person suggested he was being used for intelligence gathering or political purposes, that Carveth didn't make friends with humans without ulterior motives. Ryan ignored the gossip as best he could. Sierra, he suspected, was doing the same from her side. The dynamic between them shifted during a station-wide emergency 3 months after their initial meeting. A cargo transfer accident caused a hull breach in one of the residential sections, not catastrophic but dangerous, requiring evacuation of several levels and emergency response from all available personnel. Ryan, due to his freight coordination experience and knowledge of the station's layout, ended up in the Emergency Operations Center, helping coordinate evacuation logistics. Sierra, as the senior Carveth military officer on station, was running security and emergency response for her people. They ended up working together by necessity, and Ryan saw a completely different side of her. The commander who made rapid tactical decisions without hesitation, who coordinated multiple teams with absolute authority, who moved through crisis management with the precision of someone who'd done this dozens of times before. Residential Section 4 needs additional personnel for the injured evacuation, Sierra said, studying the tactical display. Medical is overwhelmed. I can redirect cargo handlers from Section 7, Ryan offered, already pulling up personnel rosters. They have emergency medical training for transfer accidents. Not as good as proper medical, but better than nothing. Do it. She approved the redeployment without questioning his judgment, which would have been unusual for most Carveth officers dealing with human suggestions. They worked together for 8 hours straight, managing an emergency that could have been catastrophic, but ended up being merely complicated thanks to effective coordination between multiple response teams. By the time the situation was resolved and normal operations were resuming, Ryan was exhausted and running on adrenaline fumes. You performed well, Sierra said quietly as they finished the final status reports in the now emptying operations center. You demonstrated what my people would call warrior qualities. Ryan looked at her surprised. I just did what needed doing, same as you. Exactly. Her expression softened from command mode to something more personal. That is what warrior qualities mean, doing what needs doing regardless of difficulty. You adapted quickly, made sound decisions under pressure, challenged my suggestions when you had better information. These are valued traits. You say that like you expected something different. I did not know what to expect. You are the first human I have worked with closely. She paused. You exceeded my expectations significantly. They ended up sharing a late meal in the empty operations center after the emergency team stood down, eating rations that were barely edible but welcome after hours of crisis management. Sierra was more open than Ryan had seen her before, talking about past emergencies she'd managed, close calls in military operations, the constant weight of responsibility that came with command. Having you in our lives has been unexpectedly valuable, she said eventually, her formal speech patterns relaxing with exhaustion. Not just for Terk, though he clearly adores you, but for me as well. It has been years since I had someone to talk with honestly about command pressures and personal struggles. You have your own officers, to whom I must always demonstrate perfect strength and control. You are outside that hierarchy. You see me as Sierra the person, not just Commander Sierra. She met his eyes. That matters more than I expected it to. Ryan felt something shift in the air between them, an acknowledgement of connection that went beyond friendship based on gratitude for helping a child. It matters to me too. This friendship, whatever we're building here, it's become important. Good. She smiled, tired but genuine. I am glad to hear you say so, though I suspect we are both going to face questions about the propriety of this arrangement from our respective people. Probably want to deal with it anyway. Very much so. Over the following weeks, their friendship deepened into something neither of them had quite intended, but both were willing to explore. They saw each other regularly, sometimes with Terk, increasingly for private conversations after he was asleep. They talked about everything, their different cultures, their pasts, their views on the complicated political dynamics of frontier space. And gradually, carefully, they began acknowledging that what was developing between them might be more than friendship, though neither was quite ready to name it yet. The complications were obvious. Cross-species relationships were challenging under any circumstances. A relationship between a Karvath commander and a human freight coordinator would be politically scandalous for Sierra and socially complicated for Ryan. But the connection was real, growing stronger, and neither of them seemed particularly inclined to ignore it just because it was difficult. Terk, with the straightforward perception children often have, told his mother one evening that he wished Ryan could stay with them all the time. Sierra, caught off guard by the directness, asked what he meant. "He makes you smile more," Terk explained simply. "You seem happier when he's here, and I like having him to talk to." After Terk went to bed, Sierra found herself staring at nothing and acknowledging what she'd been carefully not examining too closely. She was attracted to Ryan. Intellectually, emotionally, and yes, physically. It was complicated by every conceivable factor: cultural differences, her position, the scrutiny she was under, the basic fact that Karvath-human relationships were almost unheard of and certainly not among military commanders. But the feeling was there, undeniable, and growing stronger the more time they spent together. Meanwhile, Ryan was confronting his own realization that his feelings for Sierra had gone well past friendship. He was drawn to her strength, her intelligence, the way she balanced command authority with being a devoted mother. But he was also painfully aware that pursuing anything romantic with a Karvath commander could destroy the friendship they'd built and create professional complications for her that she didn't deserve. For now, they existed in careful balance, acknowledging the connection implicitly while not naming it explicitly, building something significant while not quite defining what that something was. It couldn't last indefinitely. Eventually, one of them would have to say something. But for now, the undefined space felt safe enough to inhabit. The news came through official channels during a routine briefing that Sierra's diplomatic mission was scheduled to conclude in 2 months. The Karvath Third Fleet would be recalling their personnel from Kilo's outpost, and Sierra's unit would return to Karvath space with no immediate plans for redeployment to the region. Terk was devastated when Sierra told him. "But we can't leave, Ryan is here. Ryan has his own life and work, Terk. We always knew this assignment was temporary. Can he come with us?" "That's not possible. Humans are not typically welcome in Karvath space, and Ryan's skills are specific to station logistics." "Then you should request to stay longer." Sierra didn't have a good answer for that, partly because the same thought had occurred to her, and she'd been pushing it aside as impossible. Ryan took the news with outward calm when Sierra told him during one of their private evening conversations. Inwardly, he felt like he'd been hit with something heavy and unexpected. 2 months. They had 2 months before Sierra and Terk left permanently, and given the political realities of Karvath assignments, there was no guarantee they'd ever return to this region. "I could request a transfer," he said, knowing even as he spoke that it was impractical. "Try to find work closer to Karvath space. Human-accessible stations in that region are extremely limited. Your expertise wouldn't translate well to the available postings." Sierra's voice was controlled, but Ryan had learned to read the subtle tells that meant she was dealing with strong emotions. "I appreciate the thought, but it's not realistic. So we just accept that in 2 months this ends. I don't know what else we can do." She looked at him directly. Unless you're suggesting we acknowledge that this has become more than friendship and try to build something despite the complications. There it was, the thing neither of them had been willing to say explicitly, now on the table because time was running out. Is that what you want? Ryan asked quietly. I don't know if one is relevant. I know that the thought of leaving and never seeing you again is considerably more painful than I expected. I know that Terk has asked me repeatedly why we can't stay near you. I know that I've become more comfortable sharing things with you than with anyone else in years. She paused. But I also know that pursuing anything romantic between us would be professionally complicated for me and socially difficult for you. What if I'm willing to deal with socially difficult? You say that now, but cross-species relationships face constant scrutiny and judgment. A relationship with a Karvath commander would put you under even more pressure. My people would question my judgment. Your people would question your motives. Let them question. Ryan moved closer. Sierra, I've spent 2 years on this station keeping my head down and avoiding complications. Then I helped a scared kid because it was the right thing to do, and it led to the most significant connection I've made since leaving Earth. I'm not interested in walking away from that just because it's complicated. And if complications mean I face censure from my command, pressure to choose between my position and personal choices, then we figure it out together. But I'd rather try and face complications than just accept that in 2 months we walk away from something that matters. Sierra was quiet for a long moment, her expression cycling through emotions Ryan couldn't fully interpret. When she spoke again, her voice was softer than her typical command tone. I'm tired of pretending this is just friendship, that what I feel is purely gratitude or respect. She met his eyes. I don't know how to navigate a romantic relationship across species and cultural barriers. I don't know how to maintain my command position while pursuing something that my people will view as inappropriate. But I know I don't want to return to Karvath space and spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been possible if I'd been brave enough to try. Ryan reached for her hand, a gesture that felt simultaneously natural and revolutionary given the careful physical distance they'd maintained. Then let's be brave enough. We've got 2 months to figure out if there's a way to make this work. They spent the night talking through possibilities. Sierra had influence within Karvath Command. She could request extended postings, could potentially arrange assignments that kept her in more cosmopolitan regions where cross-species relationships were less scandalous. Ryan had skills that could translate to other stations, could potentially find work where his connection to a Karvath commander would be an asset rather than liability. None of the solutions were perfect, but they were beginnings. The situation accelerated 3 weeks before the scheduled departure during a formal reception for the diplomatic mission. It was a large event with representatives from multiple species, and both Sierra and Ryan were required to attend. Sierra as mission commander, Ryan because his freight coordination role had apparently become significant enough to warrant inclusion. Ryan was navigating the social dynamics carefully, making professional conversation with various species representatives, and trying not to look like he was watching Sierra across the room, though he absolutely was. He noticed when another Karvath, a male wearing the formal attire of a diplomatic official, approached her with what appeared to be confrontational intent. The conversation wasn't audible from Ryan's position, but he could see Sierra's posture shift to command mode, could read tension in the exchange. Then the Karvath diplomat's voice carried, deliberately raised to be overheard, speaking in heavily accented standard about inappropriate fraternization with lesser species. The insult was clearly directed at Sierra, but implicitly included Ryan and anyone else who might be engaging in cross-species relationships. Sierra's response was immediate and devastating. She switched to formal Karvath, her voice carrying with command authority, and delivered what was clearly a formal rebuke that left the diplomat visibly shocked. Ryan's translator struggled with the rapid formal speech, but he caught enough. Honor, warrior qualities, demonstrated courage, and what sounded very much like a challenge to settle the matter traditionally if the diplomat wished to question her judgment. The diplomat backed down rather than face her openly, but the confrontation had been witnessed by everyone in the immediate area, including representatives from at least 6 different species. Later, after the reception concluded and the crowds dispersed, Sierra came to Ryan's quarters, the first time she'd ever visited his space. She was still in formal attire, still radiating command presence, but there was something different in her expression. "I publicly defended you," she said without preamble. "Challenged another Karvath officer who questioned my judgment regarding who demonstrates honorable qualities. Everyone at that reception now knows that I value you specifically and personally. I appreciate that, though I'm worried about what it might mean for your position. It means I've made my stance clear." She moved further into his quarters, looking around at the space he'd made functional but not particularly personal. "I'm tired of pretending that what's developed between us is just friendship based on gratitude. I'm tired of caring more about political optics than personal truth. Sierra, I don't know how to make this work across species and cultural barriers. I don't know how to maintain my command while pursuing something my people will judge as inappropriate." She turned to face him fully. "But I know that Terk isn't the only one who wants you to be a permanent part of our lives, and I'm done pretending otherwise." Ryan crossed the distance between them. "I feel the same way. Have for weeks, but I didn't want to pressure you into anything that would damage your position or make your life more difficult. My life is already difficult. Command is always difficult. But having you in it makes it better in ways I didn't expect." She smiled, tired but genuine. "I defended you publicly tonight because the idea of returning to Karvath space and never seeing you again has become unbearable. Now I need to know if you're willing to deal with the complications that come with being connected to a Karvath commander." "I'm willing, more than willing." They spent hours talking through practical realities. Sierra could use her influence to request a permanent diplomatic liaison position that would keep her based on Kilo's outpost with regular travel to other stations. It would be politically complicated, and she'd face judgment from conservative factions, but it was possible. Ryan could accept a promotion to senior freight coordinator that came with more authority and flexibility. It wasn't perfect. There would be scrutiny, gossip, judgment from both their species. There would be cultural barriers to navigate and practical complications about building a relationship across biological differences. But it was possible, and both of them were willing to try. The following morning, Sierra formally requested an extension of her diplomatic mission, citing ongoing trade negotiations requiring sustained command presence. It was a transparent excuse that fooled no one, but it was politically defensible enough that her superiors approved it, primarily because Sierra's command record was exemplary, and denying the request would require explicitly stating that personal choices rather than professional judgment were the reason. She got 3 months extension with possibility of permanent assignment pending evaluation. Terk was delighted when his mother told him they weren't leaving yet. He immediately claimed full credit for making Ryan stay by telling his mother she should keep him around, and neither Sierra nor Ryan bothered to correct his interpretation of events. The other Karvath stationed on the outpost had mixed reactions to the news of Sierra's extension and the increasingly obvious connection between her and Ryan. Some were disapproving, expressing concerns privately that Commander Sierra was compromising Karvath values. Others were cautiously supportive, recognizing that adaptation to a multi-species universe sometimes required questioning traditional restrictions. The human community on Kilos found it fascinating that one of their own was in a relationship with a Karvath commander. Ryan fielded countless questions, ranging from genuinely curious to invasively personal, and learned to deflect the more inappropriate ones with practiced ease. 6 months after their initial meeting in the market district, 6 months since Ryan had helped a frightened child and accidentally set in motion everything that followed. He found himself standing in the diplomatic quarter with Sierra and Terk, preparing for a formal walk through the station's market district. It was a deliberately public appearance, Sierra's way of making clear to everyone on Kilos that her connection to Ryan was acknowledged and permanent. They were dressed in formal attire appropriate to their respective cultures, with Terk between them in his own finery. As they walked through the market, other residents noticed and reacted with varying degrees of surprise, curiosity, and approval. A Karvath commander publicly acknowledging a human partner was unusual enough to be remarkable, and the three of them together, clearly a family unit, was something most station residents had never seen before. They passed the spot where Ryan had first encountered Terk being harassed, and Terk pointed it out excitedly to his mother, retelling the story again even though Sierra had heard it dozens of times. Sierra squeezed Ryan's hand, a small gesture by human standards but significant by Karvath